Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you are watching another video here on the channel today. I thought it would be fun to do another listy kind of video. I've not done one of those in a few weeks, maybe? Today I want to talk about books that have an interesting narrative structure. Because I have a lot of books on this list, some of them I own, some of them I don't. It's just easier to ask editing Judith, please could you edit the covers in? I have 11 books on this list, some of them I haven't read for a very long time. I thought this list would be much easier to put together than it ended up being, because I read a lot of books that have arguably fairly standard narrative structure, and finding ones that had a little something unique to them maybe was more difficult than I expected. But I have compiled that list for you and I'm going to present it and stop waffling now. First up, I have what will not surprise anyone. I talk about this in almost every single listed video. I don't know why, but it's Chorus of Dragons. I have a video up for this whole series that I did very recently, so if you would like to find out more about it in detail, you can go and check that out here. But just to talk about the narrative structure, this is a series which is compiled as a set of kind of chronicles that have been compiled by characters in the book. So you are reading a book from within that world, and they have footnoted and commented on various elements of the story, which you then get to read. But also within the story, oftentimes, not in every single book, but in most of them, you have different characters telling different parts of the story, and then you jump back to the place in which they are telling that story, and you go through it all, and it just makes for a really interesting read where you can follow it easy enough. You can know where you are in time, you can know what you're doing, but it just means that you get a really interesting set of perspectives on the story, because also quite often you'll have two characters who are both there and you'll get different perspectives on how honest that story was and what they thought about various different things that went on, and it's hard to describe without spoiling it. But for example, a character describing another character's parents doing it, and their reaction to that. It makes it so much fun. You get to know the characters in such a different way. You get to know the characters at different stages of their life, which I found very enjoyable, especially because it is kind of a book about different generations and growing up and such. It's such a great series. The narrative structure is one of the big selling points for me. I know some people who didn't get on with it. I think actually the first book, where obviously most people would start, it is least strong, or maybe arguably book 1 and 2 because they're most looking back on the distant past. But I think that once you get to book 3 and 4, it really excels, because at that point you also understand more about who's telling these stories and why. I absolutely recommend the series. It's one of my favourite epic fantasy series. Go for it. Enjoy yourselves. You're welcome. Next on my list I have the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. Again, a series I've talked about many a time. I am very specifically going to be talking about the spin-off book, Turning Darkness into Light, because this book, more than any of the others, contains diary entries, newspaper reports, and such that really just round out the corners of this world. I love the original books for being memoirs. I think it works really, really well, but something about that other book where you just sometimes learn more about different elements of the story through the newspaper articles, and you can infer quite a lot about the bias of that society through the newspapers, and the other characters' diary entries give you a bit of insight into why they're acting the way they do. It rounds it out wonderfully, and as a story that is, in some ways, it sounds very boring in that you are dealing with people who are translating ancient tablets. There's translations in there as well, but you're translating ancient tablets, not particularly exciting, but a lot goes on in this world, and the tablets have a lot of meaning for the world and for various different aspects of society that I think it just makes it work extremely, extremely well. And as a person with a background in archaeology, it really spoke to me, and I wish that archaeology got reported in the news in the way that it perhaps used to or does in fantasy books. Alas, most people aren't interested in, we found a slightly different shaped rock. Yay! One that I haven't talked about in a very, very long time, if I've ever talked about it on the channel, I don't know that I have, is World War Z. I don't even know who this is by. I read this on the recommendation of a friend at an archaeological dig, actually. How interesting. Who I said I had no interest in zombie books, I had no interest in watching the film, because I think it had just come out at the time I was reading it, perhaps. I certainly had a digital cover that was the film, so it must have been around about that time. She said to me, no, you need to read it because it's completely different from what you would think. And it is. What World War Z is a series of interviews that take place after the zombie apocalypse has sort of been managed. It's not over, but it's been managed. And they look at various different aspects of society, and it's kind of simultaneously how did they cope, or how were they affected by the zombie apocalypse. And it's what you would expect. You get a few kind of people who are stuck in big battles and such, but more often than not, the things that really stick with you reading the book, certainly for me, is the ecological impact or the impact on very small families or individuals, or things you wouldn't expect. So my favourite interview in the whole thing is they talk to somebody who is a whale conservationist, and this is maybe a minor spoiler. I don't think it's spoiling the book for you. Honestly, it's fine. But they talk about how when humanity took to the water to avoid zombies, they ended up killing all of the whales because they needed food, and people stopped caring because they thought the end of the world had come. And it's just a really interesting look at the apocalypse, because it is from this kind of interviewing, looking back on it perspective, and it works incredibly well, and I recommend it quite often. If you don't like zombies, I wouldn't read it. It does contain some spooky zombie stuff, but it's just a really fascinating book. It feels really well thought out. Dark and Deep is read by A.M. McLemore, which I will be talking about in an overbooked video very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. In fact, if all goes to plan, it will be coming out in 2 weeks. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe for that. This is on here. It's not a particularly unique narrative structure to do a dual timeline kind of book. In fact, I think there's probably some others on this list, but I was having trouble making this list, so I thought I would include it. And this, we have one narrative that is in the 1500s in Strasbourg, and one that is in the US that is modern day. And what I like about this is it doesn't just have history as repeating itself in these two narratives, and aren't I clever as an author, but you have one narrative kind of interacting with the other, and learning about your history and choosing not to repeat it, or seeing what's different more than what's the same. And I very much enjoyed experiencing that, and I think it's a really good example of a dual narrative book that works, or a dual timeline book that works. And I think especially when you're dealing with kind of queer narratives, and when you're dealing with that at the other intersection of things like race and identity and various other things, I think it just does a really good job of showing this is how things were in the past, and here's the hopeful parts of that, and here's the nasty parts of that, and here we are in the future, and here's how far we've come, and here's how far we've got to go still. And I just really liked the way that those were paired together. That is a kind of fairy tale retelling of the Red Shoes, combined with a sort of historically fiction kind of look at a town that got cursed to dance, and it's very interesting. The Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, which starts with the 5th season. I absolutely recommend these all the time. Love N.K. Jemisin, love the way she does narration. It comes into play in a lot of her works. There's a lot of different narrators, there's a lot of interesting playing with second person and so such, but I think the 5th season really exemplifies that, and using that to create mystery and intrigue and to set up parts of the book that you don't expect to come in later. I'm not going to spoil any of it for you, but I just would say if you're looking for interesting narrators, N.K. Jemisin is an author that you really, really want to explore, and I would personally start with the Broken Earth Trilogy. I think it's fantastic. It's sort of not even post-apocalyptic, like fantasy apocalyptic. It's just wonderful. You're just going to have to trust me on this, because I need to do a reread before I talk about it in any detail. But it is so, so good. Another book that I haven't read in a very long time, and when I did read it, I only read it once, and I think it was from the library, The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie. This is on this because every time I'm recommending this book to someone, or someone says, oh, I should read this, should I read this maybe? I always go, yes, it's got a really interesting narrator, and it's because it's narrated by something you wouldn't expect. Someone you wouldn't expect? Hard to say. And again, I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's just a really, really interesting fantasy book, and I very much enjoyed it. I think it is well worth looking at, if only because it's so different from everything else that you will at least feel your palate has been cleansed in some way. Raven Tower, Anne Leckie, which is interesting because Ancillary Justice I did not really like that much, and that does have some similar narration elements to it, but it just wasn't for me. Whereas this I very much enjoyed. One of my early overbooked videos is for The Tangled Lands. This is a collection of short stories. It's one of 2 short story collections on this list. Yes. And I like this for being a collection of short stories all set in the same world that sort of follow on from one another but are not about, each one is not about the other. It's more that the events of one story affect the events of another. So you see the consequences of the actions of the former story in this story. And it's a really interesting sort of fairy tale inspired world where people have used too much magic, and it has caused brambles to show up everywhere in kind of a Sleeping Beauty sort of way, and they can't be dealt with, and they massively affect society, and they ban the use of magic, except the elite are still definitely using it because the brambles are still turning up. And what does that world look like? How do you deal with equality in that kind of world? And it's just so well written, and it's so underrated, and I heard no one talking about it ever, and I always want people to. So read The Tangled Lands. It's a really good collection, and it's not super long, so you'll get through it really quickly. It's just an enjoyable set of stories. I would say it's also very, very sad. If you're like me and things being unfair upsets you, it will upset you, but in a good way. The other short story collection I have on this list is recently out. It's Boys, Beasts and Men by Sam Miller. And short story collections often include multiple different kinds of narration. What I think is interesting about the structure of this book is that it is a collection of short stories that have been published at various different points in Sam Miller's career, but throughout them all, in between each story, is a little chunk of another story that just ties them all together. And I find that really interesting, as obviously all of these were written at different times. They weren't written to connect, and they found a way to connect them that doesn't feel super clunky. It feels very genuine, and it actually makes for a wonderful story arc in the book itself. And as somebody who often finds myself getting a bit stuck in short story collections where I'm kind of like, I'm jumping from one thing to another, it doesn't really fit, I'm going from space to cowboys, I don't know what I'm doing. I really appreciated that link between them, just making it all flow and giving the whole book this sense of movement that a lot of short story collections for me don't have. Can you tell I like things to be connected up? Because it's the same for the Tangled Lands. Another book that is presented as a series of interviews, this isn't sci-fi, this is historical fiction, I guess. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think everyone and their mum has already talked about this. I just wanted to bring it up as I really enjoyed it as a set of interviews, similar to World War Z, except that that's looking at the world and this is more looking at the history of a band. It's a beautiful book. It gets lots and lots of hype. It deserves it. It's a really enjoyable read. It's emotional. It's difficult at times, but it just hits the spot. And if you want something that is very easy to read, very quick to read, and feels very different because of that interview style, I would say go for it. If you read it and you find that you're not enjoying it, I wouldn't keep going because it does stay the same interview style throughout, but I think it's just a really good way of telling a story. The Masquerade series is another one that I talk about fairly often. It's one that I always find myself not quite understanding, so I'm not super confident about talking on it, but I have read them all, so here you go. I enjoy a lot of elements of this book. I think particularly in the later books, maybe book 2 and book 3, there's some really interesting use of the narration and use of the prose to convey a lot of different aspects of character, especially in kind of an almost, it's not quite a descent into madness, but it's that kind of thing going on, and it makes it quite difficult to read, to be fair, because it's already quite a chunky book with a lot to understand in terms of the economics, and you throw in a whole different element of narration in there and it gets even trickier. But I do think that it works really well as a depiction of what's going on in the book itself. I really like that. I like a book that can show me what a character is going through the page. That's another epic fantasy. It deals a lot with economics. It deals a lot with the power behind empire and how to pull down an empire from within. It's a great series. It is a little bit complicated, in my opinion, possibly a little bit overcomplicated, but I really like the story and I'm very excited to one day potentially read the end of it. One day it will come out. And last on this list is a series that I added to it very recently, which is why this is 11 and not 10, which is a nice round number. This is the Tensorate Series by Neon Yang. The first book, perfectly fine. The second book, from a different narrator, even better. The third one is also, similarly to a number of the other things on this list, is told in various different things. There are transcripts of interviews in there, there are reports, there are letters, there are other bits and bobs within it as a way of telling the story, and it works really, really well because the third book is a lot about a cover-up, a corporate cover-up, as it were, and I think that telling that through reports and having to read between the lines is one of my favourite things. I love a book where you have to read between the lines. I would say that if you are going to read this series, I would actually start with book 2 and go back to book 1 and then read book 3, which sounds ludicrous, but I think book 1 is perfectly fine. It does its job, it does what it needs to, but book 2 is really, really, really good, and book 3 is even better, and then book 1 feels more like a prequel to those. I have not yet read the fourth one. I am going to. It is on my list, but I thought I would bring up because book 3 fits so nicely with this prompt and I wanted a chance to plug the series again. That's sort of fantasy with a big exploration of gender, particularly in the first book, and then it goes more into other ideas as they go on. It is well worth reading. I would recommend it. Bonus one is that Lemony Snicket biography. Did anyone else read that as a kid and be very confused? Because I sure did. What other books do you know that have an interesting narrative structure, narrator, do something interesting on the page? I would love to know. Please do plonk them down in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe because it makes me feel loved and appreciated. Nothing makes me feel more loved and appreciated than my patrons over on Patreon who support the channel and make videos like this possible, even when I'm losing my voice. If you would like to join their number and get early access to videos and exclusive content, that is all linked below. You can also find my social media if you'd like to follow that, and my Discord if you'd like to join that and have wonderful chill chats about books. That's all from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith, and welcome back. Well, no, that's what. No,